3 dogs at the window. Not 1. 3. Oren Vale didn't stop humming. His hands kept working the dough, pressing, folding, turning, while the warm smell of the first loaves filled the stone kitchen behind St. Rowan Market. Dawn had barely cracked open. The ovens were breathing heat. The flour dust floated slow and gold in the low morning light. And those 3 massive black dogs sat outside the iron bars. Still, silent. Their eyes caught the oven glow and held it. Amber and burning, like coals pressed into black fur. Each one was the size of a small horse. Their shoulders were level with the window ledge. They didn't growl. They didn't scratch. They only watched Oren's hands move through the dough with a stillness that felt less like animals resting and more like soldiers standing post. Oren kept humming. The melody was old, low and looping, something that lived in the back of his throat the way a habit does. He didn't think about it. Came out the same way breath came out, automatic, quiet, present. The first customer of the morning, a woman named Dessa who bought 2 seed loaves every Tuesday, pushed through the door and stopped cold. She saw the dogs. Her hand flew to her mouth. The man behind her, old Terence with the flour sack delivery, backed straight into the doorframe and knocked his shoulder hard. He didn't even flinch at the pain. His eyes stayed locked on the window. Oren. Dessa's voice came out as a whisper, tight, careful, like she was afraid the sound alone might set something off. Oren, do you see? I see them. He said it easy, flat, still not looking up from the dough. They haven't moved. Terence's voice dropped even lower. They've been there since before I turned the corner. That's, Oren, those aren't street dogs. No. Oren pressed the heel of his palm into the dough, folded it, turned it. They're not. Then whose? He didn't answer. Hi viewers. Have you ever had a moment where something showed up in your life that you couldn't explain, but instead of running, you felt completely calm? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I want to know. Dessa grabbed Terence by the arm and they both pressed back against the far wall, as far from the window as the small bakery allowed. 2 more customers came in during the next hour. Both of them froze. Both of them left without buying anything. The word started moving through the market the way fire moves through dry grass. Fast, low, and unstoppable. 3 black dogs. At the baker's window. Not barking. Just watching. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered on the opposite side of the lane, keeping their distance, speaking in voices too low to carry. Children were pulled back behind parents. A merchant 2 stalls down closed his shutters. The dogs did not react to any of it. They sat with that same terrible patience, their eyes tracking only one thing. Oren's hands. Oren's hands moving through the dough. Oren's mouth still humming. He served every customer who came in. He pulled loaves from the oven. He restocked the front shelf. He swept the flour from the counter. And not once, did he let the tremor that lived in his chest reach his face. Closing time came slow. The last light fell out of the sky in long orange strips. Oren wiped down the counter, banked the ovens, hung his apron on the iron hook beside the back door. He stood at the window for the first time all day and looked out directly at the 3 dogs. They looked back. The largest one, the one in the center, broader across the chest than the other 2, with a white mark like a crescent moon just above its left eye, held his gaze without blinking. Then it pressed its nose to the iron bar, slow, deliberate, and sat back down. Like it had confirmed something, like it had checked a name off a list. Oren stared at it for a long moment. His hands were still at his sides. The hum had stopped. He turned off the light and went upstairs. When he looked out the upper window before pulling the curtain, the street below was dark and quiet. The dogs were still there, all 3 of them, waiting. By the second morning, the whole market knew. The gossip didn't walk, it ran. It moved from the fish stall to the grain tables to the women washing linens by the east well before Oren had even pulled his first loaf from the oven. He could hear the shape of it through the stone walls. The way voices dropped and then rose again. The way the lane outside stayed quiet for longer than normal before the first market sounds started up. The dogs were back. Same positions. Same silence. Oren lit the second oven and started humming. He didn't choose to. The melody came up the way it always did. Somewhere between the first breath of warm air off the oven and the moment his hands hit the dough. Came from somewhere old. His mother used to hum it in a kitchen 2 towns and a lifetime away, standing at a different stone counter, wearing a different apron. He'd learned the tune before he'd learned words. It lived in him the way a scar lives in skin, beneath the surface permanent, quiet. The dog's ears lifted when the sound started. Just slightly, not aggressive, not alarmed, more like recognition. That detail mattered. He noted it and said nothing. The first person bold enough to come in and actually talk about it was a woman named Celestine, who ran the dried herb stall 2 lanes over and had the kind of voice that carried farther than she intended. "You know what I heard?" She set her coin on the counter without looking at the window. "I heard those are Ver dogs." Oren wrapped her loaf without breaking stride. "People hear a lot of things. Demarian the butcher, you know him, he said he recognized the markings. Said he saw those same 3 animals outside the Ver estate last winter when he made a delivery up there." She finally glanced at the window, looked away again immediately. "Nobody talks about the Vers out loud. You know that." "I know that." "Then you understand why half this market is deciding today is a good day to have business elsewhere." He slid her wrapped loaf across the counter. "Their loss." She looked at him with something between admiration and genuine worry. Then she picked up her bread and left. The morning moved the way mornings do, in pieces, in small moments, one customer at a time. But the energy had changed. The bakery felt different. Even the air inside had a weight to it that hadn't been there the day before. People came in faster, bought faster, left faster. No one lingered. No one asked about the specials. Their eyes went to the window whether they meant them to or not. The dogs didn't move. By midday, Demarian the butcher came himself. He stood in the doorway. A thick man with forearms like rolled rope and a face that had stopped being surprised by things years ago. He looked at the dogs. Looked at Oren. Looked at the dogs again. "You got any idea what you're dealing with?" His voice was low. Not unkind. Just honest. Not fully. Oren kept his hands moving. "Those animals don't leave the estate. Not for deliveries. Not for funerals. Not for anything." He paused. "The Ver triplets trained them themselves. That's what people say. Trained them for one purpose, tracking something specific." He stopped again. Chose his next words carefully. "Or someone specific." Oren felt something shift low in his stomach. He kept his face still. Demarian leaned one hand on the doorframe. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Those dogs belong to the Ver estate, Oren. You understand what that means? That means someone up in that mansion knows exactly where those animals are right now." He didn't wait for an answer. Oren stood in the quiet that Demarian left behind and kept kneading dough until his arms ached. That evening, the lane stayed empty long after the other stalls closed. No foot traffic. No children. Not even the usual stray cats that crossed the market after dark. Just the dogs. And the smell of cooling bread. And the melody Oren couldn't stop humming even when he tried. He was pulling the last tray from the back oven when he heard the front door. He assumed it was the latch shifting. It wasn't. He turned around. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dressed in dark fabric that cost more than Oren made in a month. Still, completely still, the way those dogs were still, like stillness was not a choice but a condition. Permanent state. His face was carved in hard lines and low shadows, and his eyes were the exact color of iron left in cold water too long. He looked at Oren. He didn't speak. He didn't order anything. He only stood there and looked. No one moved first. The oven behind Oren was still breathing heat. The flour dust in the air had stopped drifting. The man in the doorway didn't step inside. Not yet. He held the frame on both sides with his hands, Not gripping, not tense. Just resting there like he had all the time in the world and was choosing, moment by moment, how much of himself to let through the door. Oren didn't step back. That was the thing. Every instinct most people carry, the ones that fire when something too large and too quiet enters a small space. Those instincts said move away. Step back. Put something between yourself and whatever this is. Oren stayed exactly where he was. We're closed, he said, calm, even. The man's eyes moved from Oren's face to his hands, then back up, like he was clocking something, filing it away. I'm not here to buy bread. His voice was low, not loud, not performed, just low, the kind of low that came from knowing you'd never needed to raise it to be heard. Then you can go. He didn't go. He stepped inside. The door settled closed behind him without slamming. He moved through the space like he'd been in small rooms before and had learned how to take up exactly as much space as he wanted, no more, no less. He stopped at the counter, looked down at the dough Oren had been working, looked at the flour on Oren's forearms, looked at the cracked open window where the iron bars were. The dogs outside shifted, just slightly, one soft sound, a breath or something like one, and then they settled back. Lucien Vare, the man said, not introducing himself, just saying the name like a fact being placed on a table between them. Oren kept his hands on the counter. They come every morning. Lucien turned to look at the window. Since when? 2 days. Lucien nodded once. Like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. He turned back and looked at Oren the way someone looks at a problem they can't fully solve yet. Not with frustration, with focus. Close, careful, specific. You're not afraid of them, he said. Should I be? A pause. Long enough to mean something. Most people are. Most people don't understand animals, Oren said. They see size and they decide it means danger. It doesn't always. Lucien's eyes didn't change. But something behind them did, some small adjustment like a dial moving 1 degree in a direction it hadn't been pointed before. They only gather, he said slowly, where they smell safety. The air in the kitchen went completely still. Oren looked at him. What does that mean? Lucien didn't answer right away. He turned and looked around the kitchen, the shelves, the hanging tools, the low doorway at the back that led to the staircase going up. His gaze moved methodically, not invasive, more like a man reading a room the way a soldier reads a field, taking stock, cataloging exits, understanding the layout. Then he stopped, his eyes fixed on something near the base of the stairs. Oren followed his line of sight, a small wooden toy, a carved wolf, barely bigger than a fist, painted gray with one ear slightly chipped. It sat on the second step from the bottom, right where it had been dropped earlier and not yet picked up. Lucien's expression didn't change, but his stillness changed quality. It went from controlled to something else, something more careful. Whose is that? He said. Not quite a question. Oren's jaw tightened, just barely, just enough. Mine, he said. Lucien looked at him, held his gaze for exactly 2 beats longer than was comfortable. You collect children's toys. It wasn't mocking. It was a test. Oren didn't answer. Lucien stepped back from the counter. Slow, unhurried. He turned toward the door and reached for the handle. Then stopped. Didn't turn around. Who, he said, is sleeping in this building? The oven ticked. The dogs outside didn't make a sound. Oren's hands pressed flat against the counter. He said nothing. Morning came in through the cracks before Oren opened his eyes. The light was thin and pale, the kind that didn't commit to anything yet. He lay on the narrow mattress in the back room above the kitchen, staring at the ceiling beams, listening. The bakery was quiet. The lane was quiet. Somewhere close, a bird made one sound and then stopped. He heard the breathing from the small cot in the corner before he moved. Soft, even. The breathing of someone who had no idea what questions had been asked downstairs while they slept. Mika was still under his blanket, curled small, one hand tucked beneath his chin. He slept the way young children slept, completely without reservation, like the whole world was safe and warm and intended just for him. His dark curls were pressed flat on one side from the pillow. His eyelashes rested against his cheek, long and still. Oren sat up and looked at him for a moment. Then he went downstairs and started the ovens. He was pulling flour from the shelf when he heard the small feet on the stairs. Mika appeared in the kitchen doorway, blanket still half dragging behind him, sleep crumpled and squinting. He was 6, small for 6. He had a way of looking at things, at new objects, at people, at bread dough, with a particular kind of quiet attention that didn't belong to most children his age. Not shy, not suspicious, just watching. Like he was always taking in more than he was showing. "The dogs are back," Mika said. "Not afraid. Curious." "They are," Oren said. Mika walked to the window in his socks and pressed his palms flat against the wall beside the iron bars. He looked at the 3 black dogs in the lane and they looked back at him. The largest one, the one with the crescent moon mark above its eye, lifted its head slightly. Mika tilted his own head in response. Like a mirror. "They like you," he told Oren. "They like the bread smell." "No." Mika shook his head, certain. "It's you." Oren watched him from the counter. Said nothing. The morning moved the way it always did. Bread, customers, flour, heat. Mika sat on his stool behind the back counter and watched people come and go. Sometimes drawing in the small sketchbook Oren had gotten him, sometimes just watching. He didn't talk much to strangers. He was comfortable with quiet in a way that felt older than 6. Celestine from the herb stall came in mid-morning and stopped when she saw the child. "He yours?" she asked Oren, nodding toward Mika. "Yes." She looked between them, took in the difference in their features, Oren's warm brown skin and dark eyes, Mika's lighter coloring, the unusual silver gray that lived at the outer edge of the boy's irises. She didn't ask the follow-up question, but Oren knew she was thinking it. Everyone always thought it. He'd found Mika 3 winters ago, wrapped in a carrying cloth and left at the edge of the East Road during a storm so bad the market shutters had been nailed down for 2 days. No note, no name on the cloth, nothing that pointed to who had left him or why. Oren had carried him inside, warmed him, fed him, waited for someone to come looking. No one came. He'd named the boy Mika, kept him, raised him in the kitchen and above it, in flour dust and warm bread smell and the old melody Oren hummed without thinking. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't chosen it the way people plan things. It had simply become true. That afternoon, when the last customer left and the lane went quiet, one of the dogs outside made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a low, soft whimper. Oren froze. He'd never heard them make a sound before. He moved to the window. The crescent-marked dog was standing now. Not the sitting patience of the last 2 days, but upright, its attention locked not on Oren's face but on a point just above him. On the staircase, where Mika had appeared on the 3rd step, sketchbook under his arm, looking down at the dogs with those gray-edged eyes. The dog made the sound again. Soft, low, not threatening. Something else. Something that sounded terribly like relief. That evening, Oren was banking the ovens when the front door opened. He didn't need to turn around to know. Lucien Verre's presence entered a room differently than other people's did. Not louder, not larger, just more certain, like the room acknowledged it. Oren kept his back to the door. He heard Lucien's footsteps stop. He heard the precise moment when Lucien saw the child on the stairs. The silence that followed was not the silence of nothing happening. It was the silence of something stopping, completely, like a clock mid-tick. Oren turned. Lucien was standing 6 feet from the base of the stairs, staring at Mika's face. And the color had drained from his own. Lucien Verre did not lose composure. That was a fact. A known one. The kind of thing people in Blackthorn Ridge repeated to themselves when they needed to remember why they were afraid of him. Not because he screamed, not because he threatened, but because nothing ever cracked the surface. Not loss, not violence, not grief, nothing, until right now. His face had gone the color of cold stone. His eyes were fixed on Mika's face, and they were not moving, and the stillness in his body had stopped being the controlled kind and had become something else. Something held together by will alone, like a wall with a crack running straight down the center. Mika looked back at him from the stairs. Calm, curious, the way he looked at most things. Who brought this child to you? Lucian's voice came out low, each word separate, like he was being careful not to break something. I told you, Oren said, steady. He's mine. That's not what I asked. The dogs outside had all stood up. All three of them. No sound, no urgency. But up, alert, their attention pressed through the iron bars like something being held back from the other side. I found him, Oren said. 3 winters ago. East Road. During the storm. Lucian turned to look at him then, and something in that look was not anger and not suspicion. It was older than that. It was the look of a man who had spent years holding a question he was not allowed to ask, and had just been handed the answer and didn't know yet whether to be grateful or destroyed. The East Road, Lucian repeated. Yes, during the storm. He said it back like he was checking coordinates, like he was placing a pin on a map that had already been drawn years ago. Oren held his ground. What is this about? Lucian turned back to Mika. Mika had not moved from the 3rd step. He had his sketchbook pressed against his chest and he was watching Lucian with that particular stillness of his, the kind that made people uncomfortable, the kind that felt too aware for a 6-year-old's face. Lucian reached out slowly and turned on the small lamp on the shelf by the stairs. The warm light fell across Mika's face. And there they were. The outer rings of the boy's irises. That silver-gray color that Oren had always thought was just unusual. Just one of those things. Just Mika being Mika. In the lamplight, they weren't gray. They were silver. Exact, specific, particular silver. The same silver as the eyes looking at them right now from Lucian Ver's face. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. The dogs outside made no sound. The ovens had gone cold. In Oren's chest, something he had never named. Some low-level hum of unease that he had learned to live with the same way he'd learned to live with everything else. That thing got louder. Not panic. Not fear exactly. Something more like the moment before understanding. When the shape of something is visible but the name for it hasn't arrived yet. Lucian turned from the child and looked at Oren. You need to understand something. His voice was barely above a breath. 7 years ago, a child was taken from the Ver estate during a syndicate attack. The household was told the infant didn't survive. Oren didn't speak. 12 people confirmed it. Lucian's jaw tightened. 12 people I trusted. And every single one of them lied. The silence stretched. I started suspecting 18 months ago, Lucian continued. A detail in an old report. A number that didn't line up. I had the dogs retrained. He paused. Not for tracking strangers. For identifying bloodline pheromone markers. A specific signature. Unique to one family. He looked at the window. At the 3 dogs standing watch in the dark lane. They weren't coming here for you, he said. Oren's heart was a hard, slow beat. Then what were they? They were coming, Lucian said. For him. The word landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a great height. Mika tilted his head on the stairs. Lucian stood very still. Then he moved. Deliberate, slow, giving the child every chance to move away, and crouched down to the boy's eye level on the 2nd step. He looked at Mika's face. Close. Fully. And something passed through Lucian Ver's expression that had no name. Too raw for grief. Too careful for joy. Too old to be just shock. He reached out one hand. Rested it, almost without pressure, against the top of Mika's head. Mika didn't pull back. Lucian closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, the composure was back. Sealed over. Smooth. He stood up. Looked at Oren. We buried the wrong child, he said quietly. And the world Oren had built, slowly and carefully, brick by brick, in flower dust and morning light and one old melody, shifted completely on its foundation. In the dark lane outside, not one of the 3 dogs moved. They only watched and waited. Which moment in these 5 chapters made you hold your breath? Tell me in the comments. And if you think Oren should trust Lucien after what he just revealed, drop a yes or an O right now. He came back the next night, and the night after that. Nobody invited him. Nobody told him the hours. He simply appeared after closing, after the lane went quiet, after the last customer was long gone. Standing in the doorway of Oren's kitchen like he had decided, somewhere between the Vare estate and St. Rowan Market, that this was now a place he went. Oren didn't ask why. He wasn't sure he wanted the answer. The first night after the revelation about Mika, neither of them had spoken much. Lucien had stood at the counter for 20 minutes, watching Oren work in silence, and then left without a word. No explanation, no plan, just gone. Back into the dark lane where the 3 dogs fell in behind him like shadows reattaching. But he came back, every night, and each time he stayed a little longer. He started bringing things, not announced, not wrapped, just placed on the counter without ceremony. A cloth bag of dried herbs one evening, a small wheel of hard cheese the following night. Once, a jar of wild honey with the wax seal still intact, set down quietly while Oren's back was turned, as if Lucien couldn't quite bring himself to hand it over directly. Oren noticed every single one, said nothing. Lucien never explained the food. He also never explained why, 3 nights in, he stopped standing near the door and started pulling the stool from the corner and sitting at the counter instead. Like the distance between the door and the center of the room had become unnecessary. He watched Oren work. That was the thing that was hardest to name. Not the gifts, not the visits, the watching. Lucien watched Oren knead dough the way a person watches a fire. Not searching for information, not waiting for something specific to happen, just present with it. Like the movement itself was the point. Like he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for and now couldn't stop looking. Oren felt it without looking up. He felt it in the backs of his hands. In the particular way the air in the kitchen changed when Lucien entered it. "You're going to need to tell me what you plan to do," Oren said one night. Flat, direct, no warm-up. Lucien was quiet for a moment. "About Mika." "Yes, about Mika." Another pause. The oven ticked. "I'm still deciding," Lucien said. "That's not good enough." Lucien looked at him. A long, measuring look. "No," he said almost to himself. "It's not." He didn't elaborate. That night, when Oren came back downstairs to bank the second oven, Lucien was still sitting at the counter. He had one hand resting near the edge, close to where Oren had been working, close to the traces of flour that hadn't been wiped yet. He was looking at those traces, not at Oren, at where Oren's hands had been. Oren stopped, stood still. Something moved through the kitchen that had no business being there. No name, no good explanation, just a heat that didn't come from the ovens. Lucien looked up from the counter and their eyes met and held, and the silence between them was a completely different kind of silence than the ones that had come before. Lucien stood. He picked up his coat from the hook Oren hadn't given him permission to use. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back halfway. "You were trembling earlier," he said, "when Mika asked you about the dogs." Oren said nothing. Lucien's voice came out quieter than before, lower. Like something that had been held back had gotten slightly less held. "You weren't afraid of them. You were afraid for him." Still nothing. Lucien looked at him, really looked the way he didn't allow himself most of the time, and what was in his face was not strategy. It was something rawer than that. He said, "I'm not here for the child anymore." Then he walked out. The dogs moved with him down the dark lane. And Oren stood in his kitchen alone, hands flat on the counter, heart beating hard, staring at the door that had just closed. She arrived without warning. That was how Seraphine Drax always arrived. No announcement. No messengers sent ahead. She simply appeared. The way cold appeared. The way the first hard frost of winter appeared. Present before you'd registered the temperature had dropped. She walked into the market at midday on a Thursday. Not to buy anything. She moved through the lane in a gray-fitted coat that cost more than the entire block of stalls combined. Her natural hair pinned close. Her face arranged in the kind of careful calm that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with control. Two men walked behind her. Not touching her, not speaking, not looking at anything in particular. Just there. The way consequences are just there. She stopped outside Oren's bakery and looked in through the window. Oren was helping a customer. A young woman with twins who always took too long choosing. He didn't see Seraphine right away. He saw the customer's expression change first. A flinch. Small. Quick. Like something had passed over the sun. He turned. Seraphine Drax met his eyes through the glass. She smiled. It did not reach anything above her mouth. Then she moved on down the lane without entering. Oren's customer grabbed her bread, forgot her change, and left. The market went quieter after Seraphine passed. Not loud quiet. Not the scrambling kind. The careful kind. The kind where people went about their business and kept their eyes down and moved slightly faster than normal without admitting to themselves that they were moving faster. Celestine appeared at the counter an hour later, her face stripped of its usual ease. That was Seraphine Drax, she said. I know who she was. She looked right at you, Oren. I noticed. Celestine pressed her hands flat on the counter, leaning in. She runs the Eastern Syndicate. Has for 20 years. You don't get looked at by Seraphine Drax and go on with your day like it was nothing. That's not how it works. How does it work? Celestine stared at him. It means she's interested. And interested from someone like her. She stopped. Chose her words. It means something was already decided before she walked into this lane. The rest of the afternoon moved wrong. Small things. Nothing dramatic. A cart that turned down the lane and then turned back without stopping. A man Oren didn't recognize who stood at the end of the block for 40 minutes reading nothing. The feeling, low and persistent, the kind that lives in the back of the neck, that the space around the bakery had been measured. Just before closing, a folded piece of paper appeared under the door. No knock, no slip of shoe, just there. Like it had been placed with intention and speed, by someone who knew how to move without being seen. Oren picked it up, unfolded it. For words. Leave before she asks. No name, no signature. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Someone who'd learned to write without leaving a hand style behind. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at the stairs. Mika was sitting on the 4th step, sketchbook open, pencil moving. Not looking up. Just drawing. Oren folded the paper and pressed it flat in his palm. He went to the front door to lock up. The bolt didn't turn. He tried again. It moved to the halfway point and stopped, and he pushed harder and something pushed back and the door was not stuck, it was held from the outside, and the smell came through the gap at the same moment the realization did. Smoke. Thin. Early. The kind that meant a fire was still deciding how big it wanted to be. But it was there. It was coming from the back of the building. Oren let go of the door. It didn't open. He turned and ran for the back exit, and through the gap under the back door the smoke was thicker, rolling in slow and low along the floor. He hit the handle. Locked. He hit it again, shoulder into the wood this time, and it didn't move. Both doors. Locked from outside. He looked up the stairs. Mika. The fire found the kitchen first. That was where it started. Or where it had been started. And by the time Oren had Mika off the stairs and pressed against his chest, the back wall was already throwing heat through the stone like the building itself was exhaling. Mika didn't cry. He held on, both arms around Oren's neck, face tucked in, and he held on with the grip of someone who had decided that whatever happened next, he was not letting go. The smoke was moving fast. Too fast. It filled from the floor up the way water fills a low space. Unhurried, unstoppable, choosing every corner. Oren pulled his apron up over Mika's face and got low and moved toward the front of the building. The front door was still locked. He tried it again, both hands, full weight, and it didn't give. Something crashed in the kitchen behind them. A shelf. Or a beam. The sound was heavy and final. The heat climbed 2 degrees in 3 seconds. Oren moved to the window beside the front door. Iron bars, he knew, he'd always known they were there. And grabbed 2 of them and pulled anyway because there was nothing else to pull, and they held, of course they held, they were set in stone, and the smoke was in his lungs now and Mika was coughing against his shoulder. He pressed his back against the wall beside the window. Think, the upstairs window had no bars. He turned, got back to the stairs, stayed low. The smoke above the 3rd step was thick enough to lose a hand in. He moved anyway. Mika tucked tight, one arm under him, one arm on the banister, and got to the top and into the upper room and pulled Mika to the floor and got to the window and forced it open. Night air. Cold and clean and immediate. Mika pulled a breath in so hard his whole body lifted. Oren looked down. 12 feet. Maybe 14. The cobblestones below were not forgiving. Below and to the left, the lane was lit orange from the fire spreading up the back wall. He could see people in the distance. Market neighbors, witnesses, and none of them were close enough and all of them were moving the wrong direction, away, which was the right thing to do, which was exactly right, which was not helpful. The smoke came up the stairs now like something patient that had been waiting for them to run out of options. Oren gripped the window frame, and then the front door below blew open. Not pushed, blown, like it had been hit by something that didn't check the weight of what it was hitting. Both panels swung and one came off its top hinge and the sound of it, that specific hard crack of something unmovable being moved, carried up over the fire sound. Lucien Vere walked through the doorframe. No hesitation. Into the smoke. Into the heat. Like the fire was an inconvenience. Like it was something to walk through, not around. Oren leaned from the upstairs window. Up here. His voice came out rough from the smoke. Mika first. Lucien was on the stairs in seconds. He appeared through the smoke. Eyes sharp, jaw locked, moving with the kind of focus that had no room left in it for anything except the task, and took Mika from Oren's arms without a word. The child went to him without fighting, which, on any other night, would have been the most remarkable thing to happen. Lucien carried Mika to the window. One of the dogs was below. Oren could see the crescent-marked one in the lane, and somehow, impossibly, a man was already down there, arms up, ready. Lucien lowered Mika by his arms, and the man below caught him clean. Lucien turned back. The room was worse now. The heat had climbed from uncomfortable to wrong, the kind of wrong that meant the structure was in it, that the wood was in it, that time had stopped being a resource. A beam in the ceiling gave a sound like a question, then answered itself. It came down at the far end of the room. Not on them, but close enough that the impact shook the floor and the smoke rolled in a new direction, and for 1 second the room was just noise and heat and orange. Lucien had Oren by the arm. Moving. Down the stairs, already worse than 30 seconds ago, the banister on one side fully gone, the wall to the left throwing heat like a furnace door. They moved fast and low and Lucien did not let go of Oren's arm. Not once. Not even on the bottom step when Oren stumbled and caught himself. They came out through the broken front door. Cold air. Oren's lungs rejected the smoke before they accepted the clean air. A hard cough that bent him double at the edge of the lane. Mika was there. Alive. Breathing. Held by the man who'd caught him, who turned out to be one of the dog's handlers. A quiet man with careful eyes who was already wrapping a coat around the child. Oren straightened. Looked at the bakery. The back wall was fully involved now. The orange was deep and committed. The window upstairs, the window they'd just been standing in, was lit from behind like a lantern. He stood and watched it, couldn't look away. Everything he had built, everything he had earned, slowly, in flower and early mornings and cold winters. The shelves his mother's recipe cards sat on. The iron hooks. The stool Mika used. The stool Lucian had started using. All of it. In there. He felt Lucian stop beside him. Not touching. Just there. Present. Oren turned to check on Mika and caught the expression on Lucian's face before Lucian had time to rearrange it. And what was there was not the controlled blankness, not the iron water composure. It was rage. Cold, specific, personal rage. The kind that had already decided what it was going to do. The kind that was only waiting for the right moment to start. Lucian turned from the fire and looked at Oren. His voice came out quiet. Absolutely quiet. "If you had died in there," he said, "I would have burned this whole city down to find out who lit the match." The fire crackled behind them. Mika reached out from the handler's arms and grabbed Oren's sleeve. And held on. Oren woke up to silence. Real silence. The kind that doesn't belong to a bakery or a market lane or a building where noise lives in the walls. This silence was deep and climate-controlled and carried the particular quality of a space that was used to being quiet. Used to having people in it who didn't raise their voices. He was in a bed. Not his bed. The ceiling above him was high and paneled in dark wood. The sheets were heavy. Good weight, the kind that cost something. The window to his left had long curtains in gray that were letting in a thin bar of morning light at the edge. He turned his head. His throat ached. His eyes felt dry and overused. His arms had small burns on them. He could feel the bandaging before he saw it, the specific restricted feeling of gauze applied correctly to skin that had been too close to heat. He turned his head further. Mika was in the chair by the window, asleep, curled sideways with his knees up and a blanket tucked around him that hadn't been there when the chair had just been a chair. Someone had put it there. Someone had walked quietly through this room while Mika slept in that chair and covered him without waking him up. Oren looked at the ceiling, breathed. His chest was tight. Not from injury, the kind of tight that came from holding something too long and not being able to identify it well enough to put it down. The door opened. Slow. No knock. The door opened in the way of someone who had decided their right to enter the room was not a question that needed answering. Lucian Vare. Still in the same clothes from the night before or close to them. The jacket gone. The sleeves turned back to the forearm. A cut across his left hand that had been cleaned but not yet dressed. The skin around it tight and dark. He stopped when he saw that Oren's eyes were open. Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly. More like the drop in the shoulders of someone who had been ready to catch something falling and had just been told they could stand down. He crossed the room and sat in the chair on the other side of the bed from Mika's. Didn't ask how Oren felt. Didn't say anything at first. Just sat. Close. Oren looked at him. How long? Half the night. Lucian glanced at Mika. He refused to leave your side. I didn't push it. Oren followed his look to the child, still curled small in the chair, still breathing easy. He's all right, Lucian said. No burns. Smoke, but not serious. He was checked. A pause. Twice. Oren closed his eyes for a moment. Opened them. Seraphine, he said. Lucian's jaw tightened. Yes. You know it was her. I knew it was her before the fire was out. The quiet in his voice was a different kind now. Not the measured stillness of a man in control of himself, but the stillness of a man who had already made decisions and was now simply moving toward them. She's been watching the bakery for 11 days. I should have moved you sooner. You didn't tell me I needed to be moved. No. His eyes came to Oren's face. Direct. I didn't. The word sat between them with weight. He hadn't told Oren because telling Oren would have meant explaining the full situation. The air, the threat, the war that had been waiting under the surface for 7 years. And Lucian, who had never explained himself to anyone, had found himself unwilling to say the words that would make all of it real in Oren's kitchen. That was the truth of it, and they both knew it. She wanted Mika dead, Oren said. She wanted Mika gone before I could confirm the bloodline, before the Syndicate Council could be called. Lucian's voice was steady. The fire was a message and a solution at the same time. She didn't expect you to come. She didn't expect me to care. He said it simply, without drama, like a fact being corrected. Oren looked at him. Lucian looked back. The morning light from behind the curtain was pale and still, and the room was very quiet, and somewhere in the chair by the window Mika made a small sleep sound and resettled. "Where are we?" Oren asked. "The Vare estate. North wing." A pause. "You'll stay until this is resolved." "I didn't agree to that." "No." Lucian's voice didn't shift. "You didn't." Oren held his gaze. "And if I want to leave?" Lucian looked at him for a long moment. "Then I'll arrange it," he said. He didn't move. Neither did Oren. "I'll stay," Oren said finally. Not because he was told. Not because he was afraid. Because the child in the chair by the window needed a roof that Seraphine Drax couldn't burn. And because something in the man sitting beside this bed had stopped being something Oren could simply walk away from. That mattered. He didn't say that, but it did. Lucian nodded once. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely folded, and he stayed. He stayed until the light through the curtain changed from morning thin to morning full, and Mika woke up and immediately climbed from his chair to Oren's bedside, and Lucian did not leave. Not when the household staff came with food. Not when Oren asked him a second time if this was really necessary. Not at all. He stayed beside the bed, watching. 3 days passed in the north wing of the Vare estate. Quiet days. Strange days. The kind of days that had no clear category, not safe exactly, not free exactly, but something in the neighborhood of both. Mika moved through the estate with the fearless curiosity of a child who had been raised in a small stone bakery and suddenly found himself in a building with 17 rooms on the ground floor alone. He identified every dog by name within 48 hours. He could be found sitting cross-legged on the library floor with books spread open around him, or standing at the tall windows watching the grounds, or following the crescent-marked dog, whose name, it turned out, was Kale. From room to room with a focus that made the estate staff quietly wonder who was following whom. Oren healed. Slowly. More slowly than he'd have liked, in the way that burns heal. Not dramatic, just steady and uncomfortable and honest. He didn't stay in the bedroom. By the second day he was moving through the kitchen, a kitchen 3 times the size of his own, stocked with more than he'd ever had access to, and by the 3rd day he was baking. Not because anyone asked. Because his hands needed something to do, and bread was what he knew, and the old melody came up out of him the moment he touched flour, the way it always had, and he let it. Lucian appeared in the doorway of the kitchen on the 3rd morning. He stood and watched Oren work. Not unusual, but different from before. Different in the way the whole thing had shifted, not the power dynamic which had never been the point, but something underneath it. Something that had to do with the fact that Lucian now knew what it felt like to run through fire and arrive too close to too late. And Oren now knew what it felt like to be pulled out of one. That changed the shape of being in the same room. "The council meets next week," Lucian said. Oren didn't stop his hands. "For Mika, to confirm the bloodline formally, to acknowledge the heir." He paused. "It will require his presence. And yours. Mine. You're his guardian of record. The only one he has." Another pause. "They'll need to understand the context. How he came to you. Where he was before that. The chain of care." Oren turned and looked at him. "That's going to raise questions," Oren said. "About me." "Yes. People in the council, people in your world, they won't like his connection to someone like me." Lucian held his gaze. "Some of them, no? And you're asking me to walk in there anyway." "I'm telling you what's coming," Lucian said. "You can decide what you do with it." Oren turned back to the dough. Kept working. The morning was the kind that came in through high windows in clean slats of light, and the kitchen smelled like warm bread and wood and the specific combination of things that meant someone had put time and care into a space. "Seraphine?" Oren asked. "Contained." The word was chosen. Specific. He didn't elaborate and Oren didn't ask him to. The war you mentioned. The syndicate. It's not over. No. Lucian's voice was steady. The air being alive changes the board. It doesn't end the game. The people who confirmed his death 7 years ago, they're still sitting in positions they shouldn't have. That needs to be corrected. Oren understood the kind of correction he meant. He also understood, standing in this kitchen, in this building, with this man leaning in the doorframe, that correcting it was going to pull everything connected to Mika into the current. Mika. And whoever Mika was connected to, which now included Oren. Fully. He pressed the dough flat. When did this stop being simple? He said. Not a real question. More like a thought that had gotten out. Lucian was quiet for a moment. I don't think it was ever simple, he said. I think you just didn't have all the information. Oren almost smiled. Almost. That's a generous way to put it. It's an accurate one. A beat. Oren. He looked up. Lucian had moved from the doorframe. He was closer now, not close enough to reach, but closer than the distance he usually maintained, and the distance he usually maintained was the kind that meant something by its presence. Closing it meant something too. His face was not the Ironwater face. Not the control. Not the measured composure of a man who had spent his entire life being untouchable. It was something quieter than that. Something that cost him. I understand if you want a different life than this one, he said. I understand if you want to take Mika somewhere outside all of this and not look back. He paused. If that's what you want, I'll make it happen. No interference. No claim. Clean. Oren looked at him. Really looked. And what do you want? Oren asked. Lucian held his gaze for a long moment. That's not a simple question. No, Oren said. It's not. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, through the high windows, the estate grounds spread wide and green and real. Lucian took one more step forward. I've spent my whole life, he said slowly, making sure nothing got close enough to cost me anything. He stopped. Let the next words come at their own pace. And then 3 dogs that I trusted more than most people decided to sit outside a stone bakery and not move for a week. And I kept asking myself why. His voice dropped lower. Now I know. Oren didn't look away. You still don't understand, Lucian said. What you've started. The words from before. The same ones. But different now. Not a warning. Something else entirely. Something that sat in the space between 2 people who had walked through fire, one of them carrying a child, one of them being carried, and come out the other side still standing. Still here. Still choosing to stay in the same room. The old melody was still in Oren's chest, quiet and low. It had always been there. It would always be there. And for the first time in longer than he could measure, it didn't feel like something he carried alone. The war was still coming. The council was still coming. Seraphine Drax was contained, not gone. And Mika, somewhere in the 17 rooms of the North Wing, was sitting with a dog named Kale, drawing pictures of wolves in a sketchbook. A lost heir, found, and a home that had no right to exist, built in flour and fire and a melody nobody asked for, that had somehow survived everything. For now. And that, right there, is where the story breathes before the next storm. If the story hit you, if Oren and Mika and Lucian stayed in your head a little longer than you expected, drop a comment. Tell me which moment got you. Tell me if you want part 2. And if you're new here, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every week there's a story on this channel that you didn't know you needed. Stories that move. Stories that stay with you. Share this one with someone tonight. You never know who needs it. Part 2 is coming. And Lucian wasn't lying. Oren has no idea what he started.